Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Marcus McCaskill. I have been designated as the hearing officer this evening for three items. We're going to be conducting three hearings tonight in a specific order. I'm going to run through just a couple of preliminary comments that will pertain to all three of these hearings. And then we will open up the second and third hearing on a kind of a trailing docket. So tonight, there will be three matters here before me for consideration. The first is PDP 210013. It's the Come and Go project located at 949 East Prospect Road and 1607 South LeMay. Properties located in the Neighborhood Commercial or NC Zone District. That will be the first hearing. I will quickly note for the record that I have been provided with a copy of the notice that was mailed to adjacent property owners dated November 15th. I have also been provided with a copy of the notice that was published in the Fort Collins Coloradoan on November 18th. So I do have jurisdiction to conduct that hearing. The second hearing will be PDP 210009, the Jerome Street Station project. That property is located within the Community Commercial North College Zone District or CCN Zone District, as well as the Service Commercial CS Zone District. That project was also properly noticed by mail notice dated November 15th and notice of public hearing published in the Fort Collins Coloradoan on November 18th. So I have jurisdiction to conduct that hearing as well. And finally, the third hearing will be PDP 210016, Sit and Stay Dog Bar, PDP located at 1524 North College Avenue. That property is located within the Service Commercial Zone District or CS Zone District. This project has also been properly noticed with notice to adjacent property owners being mailed on November 15th and notice of this evening's public hearing being published in the Fort Collins, Colorado on November 18th. So I do have jurisdiction to conduct the third hearing as well. So with that, let me run through a couple of comments on, for those of you that are joining us tonight via Zoom or maybe on the telephone, let me maybe run through the process for how to provide public comment on these three projects at the appropriate time. And Katie, I don't know if you want to pull up a slide that maybe I can work from, or I can just run through some general instructions to the folks that are on the call tonight. Do you have a preference?
If you could run through them generally, that'd be great.
Okay, no problem. So if you are joining us via Zoom, you will want to sign in with your first name and last name or last initial. And then when we get to the public comment portion of each of these three hearings, we will be requesting public comment from in the order of the individuals that have signed up, and city staff will be helping me with that. You want to use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen to let city staff know that you would like to speak, or if you are joining us this evening via telephone, please dial *9 on your phone to raise your hand. As I just mentioned, city staff will be calling on individuals and letting you know when it's your turn. And at that point, you would unmute yourself and then offer up public comments or questions for the applicant or city staff regarding the respective project. Please do state your name and address before you get going with your comments. The reason that we ask for your address is that under the city's land use code, if you are participating in these hearings tonight, you do receive a copy of the hearing officer decision that is ultimately issued in these matters due to participation. Let me also run through the order of proceedings generally that we will be following for each of these three hearings tonight. So first of all, there will be a brief introduction given by city staff that will be followed by the applicant presentation. There will then be a more thorough staff presentation regarding the project. And there will be an opportunity for staff during that presentation to respond to any issues that may have been raised in the applicant presentation. At that point, once both the applicant and city staff have finished their presentations, I will open this up for public comment. And at that point, those of you that are here, for example, to comment on the first project, which will be the Come and Go PDP application, you would then raise your hand using the Zoom function or *9 if you're joining us via telephone to basically get in the queue, right? So that we can have you participate at the appropriate time. Generally, I limit public comment to 3 minutes per individual, 5 minutes if you are representing an HOA or a commercial property owners association or another entity. And once we have finished up with all of the public comment on each of these, on each specific application, we'll then turn it back over to both the applicant and city staff to provide maybe some clarifications on certain points or to answer questions or address issues that may have been raised during a public comment. I am required under the city's land use code to issue a written decision within 10 business days of the conclusion of this evening's public hearings. And as I mentioned earlier, if you are joining us remotely and provide your address, you will be mailed a copy of the applicable decision. So with that, I think that concludes my preliminary comments. I know that I mentioned we'd be handling these in a specific order. So at this point, let's go ahead and commence with the hearing on the Come and Go project PDP 210013, and I'll hand it over to Rebecca Everett, who will be providing a brief overview.
Thank you, Mr. McCaskin. As you just said, I'll be providing an overview of the Come and Go project development plan, PDP number 210013. This project is, hold on, get my slides in front of me to advance here. This project is located at the corner of LeMay and Prospect, the southwest corner of that intersection within the neighborhood commercial or NC zone district. And you'll see on this slide that NC zone district, this is part of a broader district that extends south of this site, to the east of this site across LeMay, and to the north and northeast of the site across Prospect Road. The project consists of the consolidation of 4 lots or portions of lots and demolition of 3 existing buildings. The project proposed is a 4,066 square foot convenience store with retail fuel sales, so that it includes a fuel canopy with 4 fuel pumps, and then an associated trash and recycling enclosure on the site as well. The project proposes 16 parking spaces, though you'll see in the staff analysis, there's a proposed recommendation of approval or condition of approval that would reduce the parking count to 15 spaces. This project was required to comply with historic preservation standards. So there's a home on one of those 4 lots that's being consolidated here that is eligible for historic designation and is not being demolished with this project proposal. And so that relationship to that building triggered a historic review and preservation of that building. There's one modification of standard or variance requested related to a requirement for spacing between convenience retail stores with fuel sales. So gas stations with convenience stores. There's a separation requirement in the code, and the applicants are requesting a modification from that standard. And as I mentioned, there are 4 recommended conditions of approval by staff. Provide a couple images of the site for a little more context. You can see here there's an existing fuel station on the site already that has existed for many years. The remainder of the site includes single family homes and existing trees. and other and related site elements that go along with those homes that exist now. The historic home that I referenced, or the home that's eligible for historic designation, is on city-owned property. The city purchased that property as part of the project to eventually widen and add a turn lane at the Prospect and LeMay intersection. And so the city continues to own that land, but would be dividing and selling a portion of that property to come and go for this project, with the home being protected in place, and the remaining lot remaining in the city ownership. Here's a view of the project site looking southeast from the Prospect and LeMay intersection. So you can see that existing fuel station, automotive repair service station, and the lots to the south on the left of the screen. And then this is a view looking south. This says from LeMay on the slide, but this is south from Prospect Road. So the home on the right-hand side of the screen here is that historic eligible property that would be protected in place with this project.
Okay, that's the 945 East Prospect Road property.
That is correct.
Okay, and the city has owned that since 1991. I mean, does the city lease that property, or is it currently vacant, or what?
You know, I do not know the answer to that question off the top of my head, but we can try to find the answer to that question during this hearing.
Okay, great. And I go ahead and continue.
That concludes my overview of the site, and so I will stop my screen share here for the applicant to present the project in greater detail.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. So I will go ahead now and turn it over to the applicant team for the presentation. And Erica, will you be presenting then on behalf of?
Yep, I will. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Cool. And then are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this is for our Come and Go store number 951. As Rebecca said, it's located at the southwest corner of Prospect and LeMay. And I wanted to show just again the existing conditions. So we're going to be taking up a portion of this western lot, and then all of this lot that's in between the historic eligible house and the existing fuel station, as well as this lot that is, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but just south of the fuel station. Here is our site plan. So you can see the just over 4,000 square foot building. The building footprint and articulation is designed to sort of match the historic house here to the west. So we have a bump out in the center, and then it comes around, and we're matching the colors and architecture as well. I'll show that later. Here is the site landscaping plan. So we're proposing several large trees along Prospect, along the new turn lane, as well as on LeMay, with a new tree lawn here and a new bus stop just north of our drive entrance off of LeMay, which will be a full movement access, and that will be our only access point for the site. There are several existing trees along the southern property line that we're going to preserve in place with this project. And then we're going to add a couple of additional large trees along the south and west to help screen the residential property to the south. Here's a look at our elevations. We have the canopy and the building both matching the same similar roof line style as the residential property to the east that we're maintaining. And then same thing with the colors and the materials that we're using on the outside of the building. And then here is a nice pretty rendering of what the site will look like when it's constructed and nice and green and pretty in the summer. We have a screen wall just at the southeast corner of the building to shield headlights from LeMay. and several plantings around the perimeter of the building and along Prospect, a smaller monument sign. And we tried to keep the building colors and everything kind of low profile to match the surrounding area. And here's a look from Prospect facing southeast. So you can see the historic house, trash enclosure is heavily screened by evergreens and some more colorful plants in the front, and then the building. Facing northwest, gets a look at the front of the building and the canopy. And another look at the screen wall and bus stop area. And eventually there will be I believe a bus shelter installed in that extra concrete in between the screen wall and that tree that's in the front. And then here is a look at what the interior of the convenience store will look like. We're going to have this kitchen area where Come and Go has fresh food, healthy choices, an indoor seating area. So if you need to hang out for a little while, you can plug into free Wi-Fi. And then here's the aisles. It's nice and open and clear, and just lots of different options. And I can open it up for questions, or actually no, it's the applicant presentation, but we can come back to questions later, I believe.
Okay, thank you, Erica, for that presentation. I'll hold any questions I have until the end of the staff presentation, and perhaps until after we've gotten through public comment. So with that, Rebecca, maybe let me turn it back over to staff at this point to run through staff's presentation.
Yes, thank you. Get my screen shared again. Okay, also, I did want to mention that in my overview, I mentioned that the home that is eligible for historic designation would retain in city ownership. I think that's not fully correct. The city is looking to sell that home as part of this development project. I don't know that the final kind of disposition of that property has been determined yet, but that may or may not actually remain in city ownership. So I just wanted to correct that for the record. All right, I want to start with a description of the one modification of standard that is requested. So as I mentioned, there is a requirement in the code that for separation between gas stations with convenience stores. The code requires a separation of 3/4 of a mile between those types of land uses. And there is an existing fuel station across the street at the same intersection to the east, and then another that's about 80 feet away, and then another gas station with a convenience store less than 3/4 of a mile away at East Elizabeth and LeMay. So there are two other fueling stations in close proximity. As I mentioned, this is already an existing fueling station. The reason for this standard, from staff's understanding, this section of code has been in the code since before really even the land use code was adopted. It's kind of a carryover from the old land development guidance system that existed before 1997 when the land use code was first adopted. And so the best understanding that we have of the reason for this requirement is to ensure that neighborhood centers are really viable for a mix of commercial uses and a mix of uses that directly serve neighborhoods and do not result in proliferation of kind of automobile-oriented development patterns. When I showed the zoning map, you can see the NC, the neighborhood commercial district, extends beyond just this corner of the intersection. This corner of the intersection, there there are other commercial uses that could occupy that corner. But because it has been used historically as a fueling station, staff's finding was that is this proposal to replace this site with a new gas station is relatively equivalent to what exists on site today, and so does not it is kind of an equivalent project and does not deviate from the standard in the code in more than a nominal and inconsequential way. There are also some physical hardships related to this property, given the narrowness of the site, the need for access onto both Prospect and LeMay, and some of the constraints that come with the need to provide a right turn lane and other things that do limit the potential land uses that could be built on this site. So with all of that, staff finds that modification meets the criteria for the modification of standard requirements, and the three criteria that are that it is kind of what is proposed is equal to or better than what would otherwise be permitted in the code, that there are some physical hardships that affect this site, and that the proposal does not deviate from the code except in a nominal and inconsequential way, given the existing condition. We also find that it is not detrimental to the public good, which is another finding that's needed for a modification of standard.
Thank you, Rebecca. Let me maybe just ask you a couple of quick questions. So I will just note that in reviewing section 2.8.1 of the code, it's clear to me that I would have authority to grant a modification of standard if the applicable conditions are satisfied, because 2.8.1 does specifically state that the decision maker is empowered to grant modifications to any of the Article 3 standards or the land use standards and development standards contained in Article 4, which we're not talking about here. But it goes on to say that the decision maker can also grant a modification related to any separation or proximity standard established as a specific measurement of distance, which I think is what we're talking about here. I'm curious as to, I know that obviously the right-hand turn lane from Prospect to LeMay is an element of this project, and I don't have the exact language from the staff report in front of me, but I remember seeing some language that project had been identified in the capital improvement plan for some time, maybe going back as far as maybe even the 1980s. I may have that date incorrect. But I'm just wondering, procedurally, how is the city's capital improvement plan formally adopted? Is it adopted as a component of the city's budget document, or is it otherwise formally adopted by ordinance or resolution of city council? And the reason I ask is that one of the criteria, specifically, I believe 2.8.2 H2, that language is tying the potential granting of a modification to alleviating a problem of citywide concern, but it has to be an issue that is defined and described in the comprehensive plan or an adopted policy, ordinance, or resolution of city council. And so my question is really focused on that. Is the capital improvement plan adopted formally by city council? Could it be considered a policy, ordinance, or resolution of council?
Yeah, I'm gonna see if our engineering staff who are on the line might have an answer to that question about how the capital improvement plan is adopted, whether that's kind of administratively approved by city staff or the city manager, or whether that's adopted by council. Staff, in this case, on this project, staff did not make a finding that particular criteria of the modification, the list of modification criteria, that criteria number 2 was met, that this substantially alleviates a defined community kind of problem or need. That's So that is a finding that could be made, but it's not necessary to be made for a modification of standard to be approved, because only one of the criteria need to be satisfied for the approval of a modification of standard, if that makes sense. But
Oh,
I,
yeah, understood, but if
Okay,
there's somebody
yeah.
on staff that can help answer that question about whether the city's CIP is formally adopted by city council, whether as a standalone document or perhaps incorporated into the budget that's formally adopted by city council, that would be, I'm just
Yeah.
good background for me to have at this point.
I think it's a good question. I'm gonna see Tim Dinger is here with us from our engineering department. Let's see if Tim might have more information on that question, how the capital improvement plan is adopted. Oh, Tim, you're muted.
I apologize. Hi, Mr. McAskin. I'll be completely honest. I'm not 100% sure about the capital improvement adoption, since that's kind of a different department than what I work in. That being said, I believe it's done administratively, but I would have to check in with somebody from the capital improvements department to be sure about that.
That's fine, Tim, and I don't necessarily need that answer tonight, right? I mean, if you check in with somebody and can even follow up with an email to me, tomorrow or even early next week, that would be great if you can.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Sure.
So, thank you. So Rebecca, I'll turn it back over to you if you want to go ahead and proceed with the balance of staff's presentation.
Great, thank you. Let me move on here. Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about the site landscape plan and conditions of approval that are proposed by staff. So this site plan shows where the single point of access is off of LeMay, down in the southern portion of the site, southern edge of the site. South of that access point is a landscape strip between this development and the adjacent property. This project would include, as we've mentioned, the construction of an eastbound right turn lane along East Prospect. So that's, if you can see my cursor, that's over here with that turn lane with the little turn lane island up in the corner there. There was a variance request approved for the width of the drive entrance to allow for fuel truck circulation. Those types of variances are approved by our city engineer and outside of this hearing process. The project would replace an existing bus bench with an upgraded covered bus shelter along LeMay. So would not get rid of the existing bus stop, would upgrade the existing bus stop. There are landscape areas and low architectural walls proposed in areas of the site to provide some screening and definition to the site. And as we previously mentioned, the project shares a boundary with the historically eligible home to the west. The areas shown with these arrows here are the subject of one of the staff conditions of approval. There's a requirement in 3.2.2 of the code related to parking lot landscaping that dictates that 6% of an interior parking lot must be landscaped, and that's currently not met. So staff recommends a condition of approval to add landscaping in these two portions of the site that are highlighted with the red arrows to achieve that requirement. That would result in the elimination of one parking space in staff's assessment. And so that's a condition of approval. There are 16 parking spaces provided on site, as I had mentioned. That is within the range of parking that would be required. The maximum amount that would be allowed on the site is 16 parking spaces. So to reduce the parking count down to 15 is still keeps the project in compliance with parking standards. There is a second condition to meet bike parking requirements. So there's a requirement for both enclosed and fixed bike parking spaces. So enclosed means kind of covered, sheltered from the weather, or indoor bike parking spaces. And let me just get to the staff report here to just clarify how many bike parking spaces would be required under that condition. So four parking spaces would be required. At least one needs to be enclosed, and 3 on fixed racks. More than one could be enclosed and still meet the requirement. That's considered kind of an enhanced level of bike parking to be covered or sheltered. There's also a condition of approval related to hours of operation. The current fuel station on the site operates from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Saturday. And that helps to limit some of the noise and lighting and other impacts to the adjacent residential properties. And so the condition of approval that is proposed includes a limitation on the hours of operation for this convenience store with fuel station. The hours of operation in the staff condition of approval do not match what is existing on the site today, but the proposed hours of operation in staff's condition would be limited to 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Saturday and Sunday. And that complies then with section 3.5.1J of the code that relates to operational compatibility standards.
Okay, and Rebecca, just one quick question to clarify. Did you say that the current station operates from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m.? Or
I
6 p.m.?
did say that Monday through Saturday, and then it is closed on Sundays currently.
Okay. Yeah, I just, because the staff report, I believe, says 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Okay,
But if it's,
that
but
might,
anyway,
yeah, that might be a
understand
point
that.
of clarification we can provide, because the notes I have in the presentation here say 5 p.m. and
Okay.
I'm going off of what
Sure.
I've got from Kai here, so I'm happy
Yeah,
to
and-
clarify that.
Yeah, and but obviously there's some the proposed hours of operation included in the condition of approval are 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Saturday and Sunday.
That's correct.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and that's generally consistent with where we see hours of operation occurring for and deliveries and things like that occurring on other commercial properties. And you know, I'm not aware of any restrictions that require the current hours of operation to be what they are beyond kind of preference of that business owner. So staff looked at what would be a reasonable condition to impose on hours of operation that also minimizes nighttime impacts to neighbors. Do you have other questions, Marcus, on this, any of those topics before I move on?
I do not.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Wanted to just show, this is an applicant provided graphic, but this compares the architectural elevations for the proposed building to the adjacent building that is eligible for historic designation, as well as the proposed trash enclosure, including similarities in materials, roof style, and colors to what exists on that single family home today. So the main driver behind the architectural design for the site was relationship to the existing historic building, including kind of the amount of window area and overall kind of proportions and form of some of the buildings, and then the design of the trash enclosure as well. So that you saw here is the elevation on the north side of the building. Kind of, we're looking south at it here. As we go here, these are the south and east elevations of the building. So on top is the view from the south looking north toward the building. And the main entrance from the parking canopy or the gas station canopy areas. And then the image on the bottom is the eastern elevation that you would see from LeMay. Here is a view of the fuel canopies, which are required to have a similar roof type to the roof of the building and generally match colors, material, style of the convenience store building and provide more of a residential feel in terms of the architectural style. So staff finds that those requirements have been met. Quick view again of the trash enclosure. I'll just note that it does meet requirements for providing equivalent space for both trash and recycling facilities and includes separate doors for service from trash and recycling vehicles, as well as a person entrance to drop trash and recycling off separate from the vehicle entrance, which are both required in the code. Moving on to landscaping, the site today includes 39 trees that are already existing. This project would remove 30 of those trees. The code does allow for removal of those trees if mitigation is provided. There are a couple ways that there are really 3 ways that tree mitigation can be accomplished according to the code. One is to replace those trees and kind of an equivalent value on site. So that could be for a larger, more mature tree. There could be up to 5 trees required for replacement of that one tree that's lost, or as few as 1 tree that's required to replace it. The second method that can be used is to what's called upsizing new trees that are proposed. So instead of planting a tree of a smaller diameter on site, if a larger older tree is used and planted instead, it gives that tree a head start on growth and can be used to meet those mitigation requirements as well. It counts as kind of credit toward the mitigation value. And then the third method that can be used is a payment in lieu to pay for the planting of trees off site on other sites in the community that the city's forestry department deems appropriate for those plantings and where that canopy may be most needed. So on this site, there are 39 trees that exist today. The forestry staff identified a total value of trees of 52.5 trees that would need to be replaced if all of those trees were removed. And so 30 trees are proposed to be removed from the site. 19 would be mitigated on the property, and 21 would be mitigated through a payment in lieu to city forestry for additional tree planting elsewhere off-site. Let's talk about landscape buffer and screening and protection from adjacent properties for adjacent properties. So that landscape buffer would include a 6-foot privacy fence that's typical in a residential context with stone columns evenly spaced to add some more kind of design and strength and architectural appeal to that fence. There would be a landscape strip to the south that varies from 11 to 19 feet. So you can see the narrowest point here at 11 feet. Which is wide enough to support trees and other landscaping, and it widens out to 19 feet at its widest point. There is a landscape area attached to that's west of the fuel pumps. That's 15 feet in width. And then there is a landscape bed near the along the northern portion of the site, along that historic home site, that helps to provide some screening for headlights and these parking areas and the trash enclosure area here that might have some noise and lighting impacts. So that helps to mitigate those impacts. Quick view of the details of the fence and the screen walls that help to provide that buffering. Finally, I'll mention lighting standards. This diagram's not meant to be read on screen like this, but it is included in the packet. This is the photometric lighting plan that shows that the lighting levels zero out at the property line. And so there's not spillover lighting impacts to adjacent properties. Typically, the biggest lighting impact associated with gas stations is in those canopies. We do have in the code pretty stringent requirements for flush mounting of lights, so those light fixtures don't drop down and create more glare, and for light levels that provide safety and security under those canopies and good visibility under those canopies, but don't cause a lot of light spillover outside of the site itself or outside of the canopies themselves. So this project as proposed does comply with the limits of the LC1 lighting district, which is applicable to this site, or I'm sorry. Staff proposes a condition of approval that would bring the site into compliance with the limits of the LC1 lighting district. And that would be to reduce off-hour site lighting down to that lower lighting level to improve neighborhood compatibility. This site is actually located in the LC2 lighting district. This condition of approval would reduce those lighting levels after hours down to the level of a more residential lighting context. And that's what the LC1 lighting district reflects, more of a neighborhood residential context. So that's the intent of that condition of approval. All right, this is the and a final staff findings here. Staff finds with the Come and Go project development plan, PDP 210013, that the project applies or complies with the applicable requirements in Article 2 of the Land Use Code, and that the project complies with the standards in Article 3 of the Land Use Code, as long as 4 conditions of approval are applied. So staff recommends a condition related to bicycle parking, the parking lot interior landscaping, the hours of operation, and then finally the lighting, the off-hour, after-hours site lighting. Staff further finds that the PDP complies with the requirements for the neighborhood commercial district in Article 4 of the code, and staff recommends approval of the request for the modification of standard to section 4.2.3 or 4.23 B2C8, which is that separation requirement from other fueling stations. Finally, staff recommends approval of both the modification of a standard and the Come and Go project as proposed and with those conditions of approval. So I will end the screen share and welcome any questions and the opportunity to respond to public comment.
Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate that staff overview of the project. Before we open it up to the public comment portion of the hearing tonight, a question for Erica or the applicant team. I mean, there are 4 proposed conditions of approval. Are those conditions of approval conditions that have been reviewed and agreed to by Come and Go at this point, or
That one I'll need Tom and Dan probably to provide some input on.
Hi, my name is Tom Carrico. I'm with Come and Go. I'm a real estate manager with Come and Go. I do have a couple questions and clarifications as it relates to this. The first clarification is with the home that has been designed for designation for historicals. We have that property under contract with the city of Fort Collins, and we are currently waiting to go before city council in order to complete that purchase. So just wanted to let everybody know that that was one of the things we talked to the city about when we first started in with this project. The second is on the condition of approval for the hours of operations. Just curious as to why we would be held to the standard of closing at 7 o'clock when the 7-Eleven that's across the street is open 24 hours. And so we've had some discussions as it relates to the hours of operations with the city and the city staff. But the hours that have been discussed are a surprise to us. We had always talked about from, I believe it's from 5 to 11, 7 days a week. So that's my comments on it, and I can turn it over to Dan if he has any additional comments.
Okay, but Tom,
That's my understanding as well.
or maybe Dan, before you jump in, but in terms of the bicycle parking, the interior parking lot landscaping, and the lighting condition, namely that the lights be dimmed during off hours to comply with the LC1 standards. Those are all acceptable at this point.
Yes, and we did discuss with Kai, particularly on the lighting, that all of our fixtures will actually be dimmable for that specific reason. So I think all those other items have been discussed and agreed to. I think the one that we were told would not be a condition would be the restricted hours, but that we were certainly willing to work with the city and the neighbors to reduce from 24-hour, which would be standard operation for us, down to a more restrictive time frame. That does differ quite a bit from what we did discuss specifically though on the hours.
Yeah, and Dan, just for my for my notes here on the hearing, what's your title with Come and Go, sir? Or
Yes, I am the site development manager for Come and Go.
Site development manager. And Tom, you were director of real estate, or what was the title?
I'm a real estate. We don't call it a real estate manager, but we call it which
Real
is
estate
essentially
development
what we
manager.
are. Yeah, real estate development manager, like official title. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Great. And Rebecca, before we get to the public comment portion of the hearing, do you have any further comments on those the proposed reduced hours of operation that are set forth in staff's condition of approval?
No, I don't have the full history from Kai on this. And trying to find a little bit more information kind of in the background here to understand kind of when that condition kind of arose in the process. But that is this is a type of condition of approval that we have applied or recommended as staff on other projects that have a similar context, where there is a neighborhood directly adjacent that might be impacted by things like noise and lighting late at night. And late at night and early in the morning with deliveries and trash service and things like that. I will note that the site plan does include, the trash enclosure includes a small portion where a trash truck would need to back up and have the kind of backup sounds happening on site. And so there are, we receive complaints on other sites around the city in the areas where those types of operations happen very early in the morning or happen late at night that can cause some impacts. And so that is the intent behind that recommendation of approval, but I don't have the full history of what might have been discussed and kind of specifics on the hours that were
Perfect.
selected.
And in terms of how those hours are imposed on not just this site, but other similar sites within the city that may have a residential context, are those hours of operation then just simply set forth in the FTP? Or Or is there a covenant, or what's the enforcement mechanism?
Yeah, the enforcement mechanism is a note on the final development plan, on the site plan. And if there is an observed violation of those hours of operation, that would trigger a zoning violation process that could result in a citation. If it's not corrected, and that is, we have proceeded with enforcement of hours of operation on other sites in the past.
Okay,
And if it does make a difference, we are able to restrict those hours of delivery times. And Come and Go does actually deliver our own fuel, so we can set those schedules specifically and prohibit delivery during certain hours. We certainly don't want to disturb the neighbors either.
okay, thank you, Dan. So that, I appreciate that additional input. So at this point, it is 6:21 PM. Let's go ahead and open the public comment portion of the hearing, and Katie, I'm gonna probably look to you to help with this process. But again, for those of you that may have joined late, if you are participating in the hearing via Zoom, please do use the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen to get into the queue. Or if you're listening via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand as well. So Katie, how many members of the public do we approximately at this point have signed up for public comment?
At this point, I'm seeing 3 hands raised.
Okay, so who's the first individual?
Sure. It did just jump to 4, but the first individual is listed as Colin. So Colin, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and state your name and address for the record, and then begin your comment.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Colin Campbell, and I'm a resident and owner of a house on a nearby street, Lake Place, 1105 East Lake Place, which is just a block or two away from this property. My concern is about the traffic flow. The traffic going northbound on LeMay who want to turn left into this property, I think are going to have difficulty because of the volume of traffic from the other 3 directions. The traffic that's turning south off of Prospect, the traffic that's turning south, well, both directions off of Prospect, as well as the traffic going straight through southbound on LeMay. And those other 3 traffic flows happen in sequence based on the traffic lights. And so I think it makes it difficult. The extent of the volume of the traffic from those other 3 will make it difficult for the northbound traffic to turn left to cross through that traffic to get into the property. And I think this is especially true during the 3 rush hour times, you know, people going to work in the morning, during lunch break, and going home from work, as well as the people that are either dropping off or picking up their kids from the schools. And there's a bunch of schools nearby who would be likely passing through these intersections. I had a little email correspondence with Steve Gilchrist, and I think he indicated that your staff had looked at, done some sort of a study of the traffic patterns, and decided that this wasn't going to be a problem. And if so, they might have a legal thing in the paperwork that says that they can stop any left-hand traffic or do something to not allow that northbound traffic to turn left into the property, after all, as something in a future that they could pull the trigger on that. So first of all, you know, I sort of have a specific question. Have you done any quantitative measurements with equipment to characterize that southbound traffic right at the entrance of the property, essentially, in order to quantitatively say whether or not this is really a problem or not, rather than a qualitative judgment on that matter. And secondly, if you do, go through with this project with this right-hand lane and so forth, and if you do decide to prohibit that left turn, as I described, what's that going to look like? How is that constructed? Is it going to be like a retaining wall or something like that to prevent that left turn? And if so, do you build your lanes ahead of time to account for that additional structure so that you don't have to tear up the roads a second time in order to implement that? Does that make sense?
It does, Mr. Campbell. So I appreciate those comments and for both that question and for the other public comment, what we'll do is we'll go through all of the public comments and then we'll turn it back over to the applicant and applicant team and city staff to respond. So really your main question has to do with that left-hand turn movement from northbound LeMay into the subject property. And what my understanding in reviewing the staff report is that there was a traffic impact study that was submitted and reviewed by the city. So we'll have an opportunity to have folks answer that question.
Thank you for listening.
Katie, who do we have as the second speaker signed up?
Yes, so our second speaker is Stacy McGee, and you should be able to speak now, Stacy.
Thank you very much. My name is Stace McGee. I live at 917 East Prospect Road, approximately 3 houses to the west of the property. First off, to the city folks, I wanted to say thank you very much for putting the turning lane in and closing a curb cut on Prospect. We appreciate that. We also appreciate you talking about the hours of operation and limiting those hours of operation. But personally, the applicant said as long as they're doing no deliveries in those early or late hours, I think as a neighbor who lives very close, I think I'd be okay with something of that nature, because it really is the trash cans and the beeping and things of that nature that provide a lot of noise. I don't think a lot of people are going to be going there at 10 and 11 o'clock at night or 5 in the morning. The main thing that I wanted to address is the abrupt change in the character of the architecture. Right now, we have a quaint little old gas station, and we have a couple old historic houses. And I think that there was no effort made on the garbage enclosure at all. It looks just like a standard garbage enclosure. And I think that there was very limited effort made on the main building to give it any kind of a residential character, as you all said. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGee. Katie, who do we have next?
Yep, so next up is Diane Campbell. And Diane, you should be able to speak now.
Hopefully you. I am a homeowner that lives very close to this area. And my concerns, we have read the proposal. The impact on our street, which is East Lake Place, we actually had, right after the proposal came out, we had a neighborhood gathering. And we are all single family owners pretty much on our street. Everyone was a bit concerned about this for several reasons. We have a residential street that is kind of a quarter circle, and it connects with LeMay and it connects with East Lake Street, which Prospect can then access East Lake Street. We have a lot of people concerned because, number one, we're residential. We have small children on our street. We have a lot of school traffic. In the evenings, there is no street light on our street. When people turn off LeMay, it looks like you're going down a country road. It's pitch black. And there's already a high level of traffic, people that cut through to go to the school, drop off their kids, get out to LeMay, as well as a lot of people that come in, turn around to get back on LeMay. They may have made a wrong turn or something like that. And I anticipate we're going to have higher levels of traffic because someone sees a gas station, they will turn in on Lake Street off of Prospect and then make another circle around to get on LeMay and then go south to access Come and Go. I'm concerned because this really starts changing the character of our neighborhood. And I think what we felt as a group was that a condition of a speed bump on our street, consistent, always there, would help deter some of that. It is a concern also because LeMay traffic is very heavy, southbound, northbound. And if you even look at the illustration that Ms. Everett put up, the southbound LeMay traffic is very heavy, even in that picture. And I don't know what time of day it was taken. And the reason I'm concerned about that is there also is a potential for accidents, people slowing down to turn into a gas station, and someone's turning right, or the traffic's heavy and they're trying to make the light. There's a lot of people that speed through that light to go south. Also on Prospect, there is very, very heavy east-west traffic in the morning and in the afternoon. I would say our traffic gets heavier about 3:30 in the afternoon or 3. And then you have football traffic in addition to that. So the character of the location, I'm concerned because while that already had a quote gas station in that location, I would picture it and describe it as a very sleepy gas station. Not a lot of gas fill up traffic. It was mostly a mechanic. And their hours, I'd be surprised if they always were open till 5, except for being a mechanic. It was not very heavily used. And I think that having another convenience store gas station combination across the street from one that's already existing, and with a gas station convenience store that's 3/4 of a mile north, is just too much in this one location. I think you would have much more success and patronization if you went further east, because people coming in and going out of Fort Collins, there's some nice big busy intersections and they could utilize it much more successfully. I do agree on limited hours because the nature of this gas station, I would say for 40 years has been very low volume, and they just aren't used much. And to put in something that would have this consistent usage all the time, plus the lighting, plus the noise, I think really is a bit much. And I would heartily ask, number one, that you decline the request for this proposal. And number two, if for some reason you're going to go through it, I would say it's mandatory you put a speed bump on East Lake Place immediately, because the safety of the kids on our street is just paramount. And we already see people speeding around that curve. And the hard thing is with our street, we have very, very tall evergreens that impact what drivers can see. And so they're starting to speed one way or the other. They don't see oncoming cars or children or bikes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Appreciate those comments. Katie, do we have other speakers that have their hand raised on this project?
Yes. Next up is Jeff Hill. Jeff, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, first, I would just like to appreciate the city for all of the planning that's gone in place already for this. It's obvious We have a professional team and experienced team, and thank them for that. And also appreciate everything that Come and Go's done, especially the very great designs to help the community know what's going in, and consideration of the historic property. That's a great citizen to have in our city. So I think the first question I have is the walkability and safety. So this would be for employees of Come and Go or customers of a Come and Go that are walking from the neighborhood areas into the convenience store. So I think that's certainly something that business would want to encourage. So it was nice to see the island being placed for the right-hand turn going southbound. So thank you for thinking of that. I was curious, it looked a little bit smaller than the one on the 7-Eleven side. And I was just kind of curious about why that was smaller and maybe a little less safe feeling. I'm on 1113 East Lake Place. And I also would kind of second that. I think we should consider in that traffic study to make sure we're looking at unsafe travel on Lake Street and Lake Place. And I do think something like a speed bump might kind of deter some of that traffic that is obviously going to use those roads to get to the Come and Go. Appreciated the fact that the lighting was considered, and they're on timers for dimming, and just making sure they're on timers so that that does happen. I wanted to second the architectural opinions. It looked a lot like the Come and Go's that I've seen in many of the kind of pop-up neighborhoods. So I don't think that we could advertise that this is sort of matching the residential area. So just make sure that's clear. And then how many peak employees will be working on site? So just making sure that 15/16 parking spots is sufficient to allow employees to have ease of access to park, and maybe not park in the neighborhoods, which is also an issue in the neighborhoods right now between students and employees of some of the other commercial districts before there was city planning. And then also kind of for that safety aspect, I wanted to understand if perhaps we should have a little bit of a turn lane coming into the Come and Go southbound, where that bus stop is, and coming into the gas station. It seems like if people are going at a fast speed southbound on LeMay, that there needs to be a little bit of a buffer area where they can slow down and pull into the gas station safely and not hit walkers and other cars. And then wanted to understand, is there going to be like music playing in the gas station, and kind of what the noise levels of that would be? And that's my final comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. And again, we will allow the applicant and staff to try to weigh in on some of these issues and questions that have been raised during the public comment portion. Katie, do we have anybody else signed up at this point?
Yes, we have one final hand raised, and this is Joe. Joe, if you could state your name and address for the record and begin speaking.
Thank you. My name is Joe Helm, and I live at 1700 C Spring Meadows Court. It's in the Spring Meadows condominium area, which is just south and a little bit west of this intersection. And I would just reconfirm that I'm very much in favor of the reduced hours versus the 24 hours. As other people have mentioned, the current station is just open during the daytime and rarely on the weekends. And this would just create a lot more activity. And I think for them to be open for more hours than the staff recommendation, you know, would just hurt this area immensely. The other question I had was in relation to the environment, and I understand there are two stations there already. But if you'll look at the topography from Prospect and LeMay going towards Spring Creek, it kind of goes down, and I'm wondering if anybody's looked at, unfortunately, if there was an environmental problem where the water flow would go down into Spring Creek and then thus contaminate the creek. So that's just a question, is if somebody has looked at that or not. And thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And I'm sorry, did you say your last name was Hill, or did I miss that?
Helm, H-E-L-M, like helm in a boat.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Helm. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Katie, do we have anybody else queued up right now?
I am not seeing any other hands raised.
Okay, so we don't have any other hands raised at this point. Let's see. I'll go ahead and close the public comment portion of the hearing at 6:41 p.m. And let me hand it back over to Erica and the applicant team. Maybe you guys, I mean, at this point, maybe you can take a first crack at addressing some of these questions and issues that have been raised by Mr. Campbell, Mr. McGee, Ms. Campbell, Mr. Hill, and Mr. Helm. Obviously, a lot of them are, I think, focused on traffic and architecture with some other safety concerns as well. But I'll turn it back over to you and your team at this point.
Okay, so I was taking some notes on the questions and I'll try to hit most of them. I apologize if I miss any. So the main one that I hear is concerns of traffic. And we did do a full traffic impact study with our PDP process. And the study was approved, and a part of that study is doing traffic counts. And we actually do 2 sets of traffic counts for Come and Go, just as a standard as part of our development process. We do one initially when we kick the project off, and then one when we initiate the traffic study. So that hopefully answers the question about it being measured and concrete, and not just a guess based on what we see driving through that intersection. The result of the traffic study is that it does support a full movement access with the current volumes that are there. And if there are issues in the future with growth of the city, the right or I guess the access could potentially be restricted to a right in, right out. And that would have to be determined at a later date, probably with a new traffic study. I might need Dan to comment on the speed bump or the city. That seems like a reasonable proposal to me, but I'm not the expert there or the decision maker on what happens within city right of way.
No, and I appreciate that, Erica, and that may be something that I maybe ask Rebecca or some of city staff to weigh in on. It's been a number of years, but my recollection is that independent of whether that speed bump could be potentially installed as part of this project as I suppose kind of an offsite improvement. The city, my recollection is that the city does have a program where neighborhoods can apply for a speed bump or other traffic calming measures. But again, it's been a while, and that program may have been updated, or probably has been updated. So maybe we can have city staff weigh in on that as well. But go ahead. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. And then I think the last traffic related item is the concern for the need of a right turn lane into the Come and Go site to, I guess, reduce the number of conflict points. So with this project, we are actually removing essentially 3 conflict points from Prospect and LeMay, 2 on Prospect and 1 on LeMay, and reducing it down to just 1. So there's 4 now, will be 1 in the future. So that should help with the cars entering the street that could hit cars that are already on the streets. And then the right turn lane would ultimately just be a matter of determining if there's enough space to fit that. And that would have to be within city right of way as well. So we're a little bit limited on space, but with limiting the number of conflict points on LeMay, that should actually improve conditions. And then, let's see. I think the last one that I want to hit on before I let Dan and Tom chime in is the lighting. So we are being held to essentially residential lighting standard on this site. So I did hear one concern of it being too dim, and we're happy to turn up the lights, but the residences surrounding immediately adjacent to the site might not appreciate that, or maybe there's just a happy medium in there that we can come to keep everybody safe on site and on the street surrounding.
And just to piggyback on that, Erica, we are 0 foot candles at the lot line. So there is no light spillover from our property. And all the lights are directional downlighting, it's all LED. So there will not be glare onto adjacent properties either. So in addition to that, the screen walls, the landscaping, I don't think that lighting will be a concern here.
Yep.
I can jump in on the architecture questions.
Yeah,
that's
go
all.
ahead and I'll just review and make sure that I hit everything.
Sure. We did work with staff for over a year on the design of the building. And I can tell everybody that this will be the least prototypical store that we probably have or ever will build. We know that that's important to Fort Collins, and because we want to be here and we want to be a member of the community, we have changed pretty much every aspect of the design of our stores. So specifically, every building material has been changed. So these are full brick and stone buildings, including the trash enclosure. I know there was a comment about the trash enclosure. The reason it looks sort of plain is because it's meant to match the building architecture. It has a basin and then it has brick above that, but it's a fully enclosed trash enclosure. So there won't be any parts that are visible to the public, and it'll be, again, matching building materials. We changed our signage. So normally we'd have a red oval sign, and here we actually are painting that oval on the brick. And then we're doing a white channel letter sign over that. And then same thing, just the white channel letters on the elevation with the residence. On that residence elevation, we've actually matched the roof line of the house into the architecture of the building. And then we've carried that element around as well to the gas canopy that has a sort of a hip element to it. And then we brought that into the awnings on all sides of the building as well with 4-sided architecture. I'm trying to think if there's anything I'm missing. So we've upgraded all the materials. We've changed our blade wall, which would normally be red. That's the sort of the metal panel element that sticks out from the front of the building. We've made that black. Again, the only one that we've ever done that way, to fit in with the rest of the color palette, to be less, to be more subdued, and then also to sort of match with the architecture of the adjacent building and with the rest of the color palette of this building. So if there's any other specific questions on any of that, I'm happy to dive in as much detail as anyone wants, but this is all working closely hand in hand with Kai and Rebecca's team to come to something that we're sort of limited by the size of the building anyway, so to some extent, just based on the geometry of the building, it's going to look similar. But from an actual design standpoint, there isn't anything that remains prototypical on this building.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I do see Steve Gilchrist, traffic operations, with his hand raised. And Steve, I don't know if you were going to potentially jump in on the traffic calming or mitigation measures on on Lake Place, but I don't know, Katie, if you can maybe, oh, great. Steve, you're unmuted. Floor is
Yeah,
yours.
I can speak to our neighborhood traffic mitigation program. That is still in place. It's a program we have that it's not really pushed through our development review. It's not something we have anything in the code that can require them to install speed bumps. And part of the reason is we don't do that just arbitrarily. It's something we do petition neighborhoods. We require, a consensus to be achieved with those neighborhoods. And then the other thing with our speed bumps too is the petitioning of the direct and adjacent homeowners. There are some impacts with noise and stuff that we allow them some type of veto too. So it's something we can definitely work with the Campbells on that program. If they want to reach out to traffic operations, we have a program manager that they can contact, and what he will do is he will evaluate the street, collect data to see what the existing traffic volume, speeds, those types of things are. And then if we see this development come in, and if it's increasing, we can look at, those speed bumps. Even if this development doesn't come in, we can look at those speed bumps as well. So that's a program that's in place now. It's still operational. So it's one, just contact our office and we can definitely work with you on that.
That's great, Steve. I really, I had remembered that program existed, but I know that sometimes those programs come and they go, but it's but it's nice to know that that's still in place, and hopefully if the Campbells are still on the line, they heard that and they can reach out to your office for additional assistance in that regard.
Absolutely.
Okay. Rebecca, is there anything that that you think you'd like to add in terms of clarification, in terms of responding to some of the questions and issues that were raised during the public comment portion of the hearing?
Yes, and thank you. And I'd actually like to invite Steve to come back on screen to respond to a few more of the traffic questions that came up, and make sure we've got the the city response on those as well, related to the potential median on LeMay, the turning movements on eastbound LeMay, and some of the other questions and concerns that we heard. So Steve, I'll pass it to you.
Absolutely, thank you. Just to kind of go back through the Campbell's comments, one was the access and the northbound left turn lane. That's where within the traffic study, we had them evaluate that intersection level of service. And that's where it was determined at this time it meets our criteria for that level of service. And so that's where we made the determination based on the traffic counts that they provided and that study that we can allow it at this time. In any case, when it comes to some of these bigger intersections, the city always reserves the right to restrict that access if it becomes a safety or operational issue. Those are things we monitor. If there's like a larger capital project coming in that possibly is going to add medians on LeMay, we would look at doing it at that time. We can also do that through some signage, those types of things on that exit. If it's something there's no median put in, it's just something that we have that right to do if it becomes a safety issue, and we can monitor that as they come forward or if it moves forward. Going back to the, so of course, we discussed the speed bumps and the detouring of traffic. Sounds like some of that is some existing problems that are occurring, especially with school traffic and those types of things that I think our neighborhood traffic mitigation program would be a great tool to look into that. People coming and given the limited access to this site, we kind of had them close off that Prospect access, and they actually moved their access point as far south as possible, which helps operationally for the intersection of LeMay and Prospect itself. And it also helps safety wise if you can get those access points further from the intersection. And they've moved it pretty much to as far south as they possibly can within their property, other than that buffer. So that really helps operationally for the overall intersection level of service for LeMay and Prospect. Same with that right turn lane. We talk about a lot of the congestion there. That's going to help the overall operations and the delay, especially for that eastbound movement. It's one that right turn lane's been needed a long time. Just we have never had the ability to get the right of way with that smaller gas station there to provide that. So this is a great opportunity to, as they said, close off some of the access points, which helps safety, and then also provide that right turn lane that will help the capacity of that intersection.
The other thing that we're providing there is that island for the signal. And that turn lane does accommodate a WB67 truck, so large semi. That's the reason why that island is so small, is because we're trying to fit that truck movement through the right turn, that curve there. that kind of cuts through the site. But it does still provide the pedestrian refuge that will help safety and walkability in addition to widening the sidewalk on Prospect to 10 feet. We have trees in between the like main walking path and the street. And then also on LeMay, we're detaching the sidewalk and it's going to be 6 feet wide instead of the 4 that's out there today. That's right along the curb.
Looking through a couple other comments that we heard, I'll respond to comments on the hours of operations. So we were able to get in touch with Kai, kind of in the background here, to understand a little bit more of the what drove that particular condition of approval. The specific hours of operation that were selected for that condition were not necessarily driven by a particular comparable or some other kind of data that drove that. It was really looking at what might be reasonable with the neighborhood. So there's definitely some flexibility there and what would kind of provide the best kind of business operations for the proposal and protection of the neighborhood from a compatibility perspective. Obviously, we heard some comments in favor of restrictions on the overall operations and comments supporting limits on operations specifically for deliveries, which the applicant has been willing to agree to. So as a staff, we would be happy to kind of work further through this conversation tonight, or even defer that hours of operation conversation a little bit later in the process if that's the best approach. But staff does recommend continue to recommend some limitation on hours of operation to ensure protection of the residential area.
I think we'd agree to that too as well. I think that's very reasonable.
Yeah, and Rebecca and Dan, I appreciate that. I mean, it really sounded like, probably some sort of hybrid approach, right? Where there's a kind of a hard cap or parameters for hours of operation, period, right? But then maybe, if city staff ultimately says, look, you can open a little bit earlier, stay open later, right? That there's some restrictions on trash pickup or fuel deliveries, right? Those because those tend to generate or have the most noise impact. So that's something that I would be comfortable probably deferring that to the FDP stage for the applicant to continue to work with staff on outlining what achieves that balance that I think Rebecca was just talking about, right? Balancing the business needs of your operation with the important needs of the surrounding community there. So does that work from the city's standpoint, Rebecca?
Yes, I think that if the applicant is agreeable to working on that, and we can retain, staff's recommendation would still be to retain a condition of approval that is that addresses this, so that there's some enforceability behind that conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that I'll do my best to incorporate what I've heard tonight, but then build in maybe some flexibility for city staff working with the applicant to vary from what the condition that I may have in that regard, right? If it ends up working best for both of the parties.
Great. Yeah. There were a couple other comments that I heard, and I may have missed in the applicant's response, but I want to make sure that those are addressed by the applicant. There was a question about the number of employees on site at peak times, and kind of how much parking would be needed to support that. There was also a question about noise level of any music or kind of sound coming from within the building. And then a question about the how any potential environmental hazards or spills or contamination would be how those would be managed, or how the Spring Creek or other resources or adjacent properties would be protected. So
and I can answer all those.
That back.
Yeah, thank you. As far as the noise goes, I don't know if the specific equipment that we're using now even has that incorporated, but regardless, it's dimmable and shut offable. So I don't think that's something we would have an objection to not doing. I know that we've done sound studies, and that the noise on our site is not able to be heard above ambient levels of the adjacent streets. So I think people have that concern generally. I think it's an appropriate concern. But the reality of it is we're a parking lot with a convenience store on it. So there's no horns blaring at different hours of day. There's maybe a delivery here and there, but there's no idling engines or anything like that. So I think people would be pleasantly surprised that it's not very disruptive. From the safety standpoint, all of our equipment, it really is the state of the art, most safe equipment that there is. So our underground tanks are double walled fiberglass tanks with an interstitial monitoring space. So any change in pressurization or any leak is immediately detected. And then we have teams that respond immediately to that as well. Everything is on shutoffs. Even if you forgot the handle of the pump in your car and you drove off, it would shut off immediately, so there wouldn't be any spillage, or it'd be very minimal. We are the only convenience store chain of any kind that has received AWS certification, which is the highest water quality certification, and that was in the Fountain Creek Watershed District in Colorado Springs. So it is something we take very seriously as a company, and we're rolling those elements that have helped us achieve that out to every store, and a lot of that's incorporated in this one as well. I don't know the specifics about drainage towards one creek or other, but I know that we do have, and Erica, you can probably get into specifics about how that drainage is handled if there were to be a leak. And I'll turn that over to you in a second. There's one more I feel like I'm forgetting.
Employees.
Employees, 3 to 5, typically, over the course of a day. We usually designate the farthest stalls as employee parking. In this case, we don't have very many stalls around the building anyway. So I would say typically 1, maybe 2. I'm assuming that we'll have employees that walk and bicycle as well. But that would be the most it would be used at any given point. So I just wanted to comment too that I really appreciate the well thought out, good questions and comments that we've received. It's very much appreciated, and I guess about what I'd expect from Fort Collins. So thank you.
Yep, so I can speak to the drainage patterns on site and tell you that essentially all of the paved areas on site are going to be captured by on-site storm sewer, and then they're actually directed to a spill containment vault that we have on the site that is going to separate any minimal amount of fuel that may spill if somebody drives off with the pump still in their car from the water that enters our underground stormwater detention facility. So that's a piece of it. And I guess just going to Spring Creek, like you're really not going to see a whole lot of flow even leaving the site since it is captured by our storm sewer system. Any of the flow that leaves the site is going to be much less than the existing condition that's leaving the existing fuel station. And it'll primarily pass through landscape areas before it sees the city right of way and LeMay and Prospect to head downstream.
So I can speak to why this location, and that was one of the questions that was brought up, that maybe there's more success if we moved to capture more traffic. So we as a company have been looking at the Fort Collins market for 10 plus years, if you will. And to the city's credit, they are very succinct in where they prefer to have gas station convenience stores and in their zonings, which is appreciated by us. Although very frustrating for me, but very appreciative of that as well. the reason it is attractive is that there are two stations there, right? We've been working with the Dunlops for over 3 years on the purchase of their property. And they've been very, very mindful of the competition that's in the area, and what's happening in the area, which again speaks to what we've done with the site plan as it relates to making changes and moving things around in the site plan. Just as a company, Come and Go we don't do stores just to do stores. And so we have to, be able to present to our executive committee that the store will in fact be successful. And we do a lot of vetting throughout that process. And this location does work for us from that perspective because there is the existing gas station there. It does meet some of the city requirements as it relates to that. And we believe that we can offer a better product for the citizens of Fort Collins. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate those comments. Anything further from the applicant or staff at this point on responding to some of the questions or issues that were raised during public comment?
I think we covered everything that I was able to note down during the public questions. Is there anything that you have, Rebecca, that we missed?
I don't have anything else that I noted for either staff or the applicant in my notes.
Okay.
Great. So with that, again, I'd like to thank staff. So Rebecca, thank you to you and your team. As usual, you put together a very thorough staff report, which I will spend some additional time going through concerning the application and the applicable Article 3 and 4 standards that are triggered here. But at this point, I don't think I have any further questions. As I mentioned before, when we opened the public hearing on this first of 3 projects tonight, I am required to issue a written decision within 10 business days of the conclusion of the hearing. And I appreciate everybody's participation tonight, both from the applicant side and the city side, and especially those members of the public that were able to join us on this Wednesday evening. So with that, I will close the public hearing on the Come and Go PDP at 7:07 p.m.